So I'd like to welcome everybody and meeting about the USA. Fantastic to see people from so many places, particularly pleased to see the USA comrades. So without further ado, would you like to make a start, John? I should introduce John Reimann, who's a member of WIN from California, for people that don't know that, a member of Oakland Socialist. I'll leave you to say anything else, John, but off you go.
So, comrades, it's said that when the US coughs, Europe, and by extension, the world catches a cold. And if that's true for a cough, it's 1,000 times more true when 29 million people in the US catch COVID and over 500,000 die. And the same is true for the political pandemic that reached crisis proportions and still affects the patient, the United States, to this day. And like COVID, to understand the political pandemic and what follows, you have to start with a world historical perspective. In its own way, the election of Trump flows from the collapse of the Soviet Union, which gave rise to a wild overestimation by the US capitalist class of its own global power, leading to the US invasion of Iraq. And this, coupled with the defeat of the Arab Spring and other rebellions of that time, gave rise to a whole reactionary period, which included the rise of white nationalism, of which Islamophobia is a part. And even Donald Trump, in that lizard brain of his, with his Make America Great Again theme, was played in part on those twin themes of Islamophobia. We have to remember his Muslim ban, which was his first act when he came into office. Islamophobia plus restoring US supremacy globally. The fact that that latter completely contradicted his isolationism never bothered either him or his supporters. Domestically, his election was also enabled by the role of the US Union leadership, which over 75 years has repressed those members who struggled to keep alive all the fighting and also the socialist traditions of the labor movement. And this has resulted in a serious retreat in even union consciousness, never mind the more general class consciousness. And yes, the decline of the industrial sector also played a role, but we must never underestimate the effect of the union leadership. In other words, Trump was and is not some freak of nature. He was really an anticipation, a man somewhat ahead of his time, and he and the movement that he led and leads remain a very real force in the United States today. Among other things, his foreign policy was an extorted and extreme expression of one side in an ongoing debate within the US so-called foreign policy establishment, which means the main strategists for the US capitalist class. That debate was first around the question of the world order and whether it was worth saving, with some saying it was never really that much to begin with, and others saying it was absolutely essential. Another part of that debate, which is, the two are interconnected, was around the extent to which US capitalism can and should assert itself around the world. What these two debates reflect is the interlinked facts of an increasingly unstable world order and the decreasing power of US capitalism throughout the world. And in part, Trump and others like him are a product of these processes. And he may have accelerated both these processes, but he has not been the sole cause of it. And incidentally, had it not been for COVID, the timing of whose appearance was completely accidental, I think Trump definitely would have been reelected, and possibly even with an overall majority. And we have to realize that there were just three swing states, Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin. The difference in the votes between Trump and Biden in those three states was about 40,000. It amounted to little over 0.2 of a percentage point, the difference in the votes of those three. Had those votes gone the other way in those three states, we would be talking about President Trump today. And if you think the previous 4 years was bad, January 6th gives a glimpse of what another 4 years of Trump would have been like. And the evidence is now starting to appear that somebody or some bodies in the Pentagon and or the White House intentionally delayed sending the National Guard in on January 6th in order to allow that would-be lynch mob to enter the Capitol. It also seems that some members of Congress gave tours to and or coordinated with some of the leaders of that lynch mob. Now, regarding the police, even some of the capitalist class is starting to worry about the long record of police collaboration with the fascist Proud Boys and others, and really a shining example of where the police are at. Last summer, at the height of the Black Lives Matter protests, there was a small town in Virginia which had a protest which was something of a celebration. And two cops in that town were recorded dancing and singing with the protesters and in general celebrating with them. Those same two cops were just recently arrested for being part of that racist and fascist mob that invaded the Capitol on January 6th. So much for that idea that there are some good cops. We also have to ask ourselves why there was no popular resistance to these fascists. And a New York Times article recently explained what happened. Starting in April of 2020, the leaders of the main nonprofits, along with the AFL-CIO leaders, started to meet to discuss what Trump might do to subvert the election and how they could counter his plans. These meetings were a natural outgrowth of their entire single-minded focus in getting him elected in the run-up to November 3rd. And through these discussions, a coalition was born called the Defend Democracy Coalition. And their coalition focused single-mindedly on pressuring some of the Republicans. According to their own spokespersons, they intentionally discouraged mass protests in order to stay in the good graces of the capitalist class and that class's media. The only reason why the Republicans did not succeed in stealing last November's election was that Biden won too many states for the Republicans to swindle. As it was, they didn't dare, and the capitalist class overall was too happy with Biden. Not only that, but the military tops were unwilling to obey a potential Trump order to bring out the troops in order to reverse the elections. And if that is what was central to maintaining bourgeois democracy in the United States, then I think we would all agree that is a very weak read indeed. What really stands out is the complete absence of labor and in fact of the working class as an independent force. That is what opened the door to January 6th and the following situation. You have 5 Republican members of the House who are directly tied to white nationalist groups, to the same white nationalist groups that organized January 6th. And one of them, Paul Gosar, spoke at an overtly white nationalist, white supremacist conference a few weeks ago, the America First Political Action Committee. Others are directly tied to QAnon, which advocates that the Democrats are a giant baby kidnapping ring that kidnaps and drinks the blood of babies. And according to the most recent survey, 17% of people in this country believe some or all of what QAnon claims. And it's amazing that you actually have 2 open QAnon supporters in Congress, and they are stars, rising stars of the Republican Party. QAnon, incidentally, is spreading globally. You have 76% of Republicans believe the election was stolen. So what's happening is, I think most comrades would be familiar with the AfD in Germany, the Alternative for Germany, which is close to, I wouldn't say it's fascist, but it has a fascist wing. And something like the AfD has taken over the Republican Party. In other words, mass hysteria and mass denialism plus mass bigotry is still alive and well in the United States. Now, January 6th was a wake-up call for Biden and the US capitalist class. And they realized that they had to make some major steps to try to undercut this hysteria. And the vaccination plans were part of it, but also they had to do something major to alleviate the economic crisis. Incidentally, according to one survey, 53% of renters are behind in whole or in part in their rent. And once the eviction moratoriums expire, they expect that there will have been 30% of all renters will have been evicted or will be evicted. So Biden, I think that that fact of January 6th forced Biden and actually the world capitalist class to take a lot more decisive economic action. What Biden has done and the Republicans through this relief plan is similar to what EU officials and also the World Bank officials are advocating. Biden also plans to return the US to its former leading role, but he recognizes that he must strengthen his base at home. And that is where he is putting his emphasis. He just pushed through that $1.9 trillion economic bailout plan, one of the largest such packages in US history. Just one example, right off the top, it's going to give a family of four with an income below $150,000 of $5,600. It's estimated that it will lift 4.1 million children out of poverty. What's noticeable about the plan is not only its size, but the overwhelming bulk of it goes to the working class and to small businesses, rather than to big business and the capitalist class. And that is why, despite the fact that Biden is only around 53% approval rating, one poll showed 73% support for the bailout, including 60% of Republicans. And I believe that Biden's popularity will increase for a time. So all of this is interrelated, because it is now the Democrats that represent bringing the country together, meaning political stability, and I believe he may well achieve this for a time. The moderate wing, so-called, of the Republican Party is now nearly irrelevant, and within that party. And just recently, for example, it was revealed that one of their 2 or 3 leading US senators had said that the January 6th rioters were great patriots, and that he would only have felt unsafe if it had been Black people or Antifa that had invaded the Capitol. And he remains still a mainstay of the Republican Party. That's Johnson is his name. They are now fully committed, the Republicans are, to governing despite being in a decisive and proven minority. And they have 2 main methods of trying to accomplish that. First is gerrymandering, which is distorting the electoral districts so that the Democrats are underrepresented in a sense. And the other is through outright voter suppression. For what they did, first they started by closing the polls mainly in Black voting districts. And when that was countered with encouraging people to either vote early or to do mail-in ballots, now the Republicans are further countering that. So far, over 250 bills have been filed in 33 different states that would make voting more difficult. In Georgia, for example, they have banned distributing food and water at the polls, and at the voting lines. And also, they have just about eliminated voting on Sundays, which was a major get out the vote drive.
Excellent. And Amy was
among for Black voters who went en masse directly from their churches to voting at the polls. In Arizona, where ballot collection is already outlawed. Oh, incidentally, in Georgia, they're also moving to ban no excuse absentee voting. In Arizona, they're moving to ban collecting the votes of absentee voters, and also moving to allow the legislature to disregard the outcome of presidential votes and appoint their own electors if they prefer. So what's happened overall, the favored party of the US capitalist class, or or the formerly favored party, is now committed to a form of rule that means a sharp change from the past 150 years of rule. And therefore, as I say, the capitalists are shifting increasingly towards the Democrats, as seen by big money donations. This means that overall, the US capitalist class is still committed to bourgeois democracy because it sees that as the most stable means of continuing their rule. And we have to ask ourselves how we got to this dangerous state of affairs. And we must admit that there is a near paralysis of the US working class. I mentioned the role of the US union leadership, but we also have to take a hard look at the Black Lives Matter movement. And that movement and the leaders of that movement also, we have to admit, we do ourselves no favors if we don't admit this, that they bear share of the blame for the fact that together for the fact that some 40% of voters from union households voted for Trump. Now, as far as Black Lives Matter, which we saw an estimated up to 26 million people participate in the protests. And those protests accomplished a great deal, especially bringing the issue of racism, structural racism, front and center, and to the attention of many in the United States. But what happened to that movement? How did it play out during the election campaign? And what happened was that they collaborated, as I said, with the union leadership in demobilizing that movement. And as I say, we don't do nobody, least of all ourselves, any favors if we close our eyes to certain weaknesses in that movement. Politically, and I have to speak for reasons of time quite bluntly and directly here, politically, it raised the racist police violence as a single issue, rather than as part of the issue of the role of the police as a whole. Further, there were all the surrounding issues, poverty and outright hunger, which has struck the Black working class particularly hard. Also, there is the issue of racist voter suppression. And on all of these issues, there was no attempt to mobilize either the Black Lives Matter movement, nor the left as a whole, nor the union membership. And I don't agree that the so-called decentralization of Black Lives Matter is or was a step towards democracy. It's just like with Occupy Oakland, it left a layer of unaccountable and unofficial leaders to control at the national and in fact at the local level. And this incidentally is causing a split in Black Lives Matter, as some local leaders are complaining about how millions of dollars were donated to the movement, and there's no accountability for how that money is being spent. And at the local level, there's no structure, no channel through which political issues can be democratically discussed. As far as the unions, the main thing happening today is the attempt to organize an Amazon warehouse in Bessemer, Alabama. And because of the focus on Amazon, and because it is now so critical to the US economy, those workers may be able to reverse the string of defeats of recent organizing drives. But let's be clear, winning a representation vote is not the same as winning a union contract. That will be the next struggle, and we have to be aware that Amazon has 110 such warehouses in the US and 185 globally. So it's not going to be that easy to win a decent contract in just one of those warehouses. Now, finally, I'd like to make a couple of points regarding the coming period. I watched Joe Biden's national address the other day, and I think it will have gone down extremely well with the great bulk of the people in the middle, those who want to return to, quote, normalcy as they conceived it. And therefore, I think his presidency will be a lot stronger than I had predicted, at least for the immediate period. But there are landmines.
20 minutes. You had 20 minutes, okay.
Thank you. But there are landmines laying in wait First is the economy. And I was hesitant to predict inflation because I've mistakenly done so for the last 15 years. But inflation, but there has been, in fact, inflation of real estate values and stocks, which are the things that the capitalists buy. It just this weekend, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal detailing supply side weaknesses and demands on the supply side, which does make it seem like inflation may start to take off, and inflation of consumer prices. There's also the potential landmine of political environment of the political, environmental, and economic refugees. Already, migration from Latin America into the U.S. is increasing, and it will continue to do so. And the only way to deal with that, similar to Brexit, is by raising the need for international working class solidarity, which of course the Democrats won't do. And it shows once again the need for a revolution within the unions and for a mass independent working class party. Then there is the issue of the Republicans trying to seize power through an overt racist minority. And that could lead to a big mass movement in and of itself. So then there are also possibilities of all sorts of possible environmental disasters. The main point, though, is this: Biden could well stabilize things for a time, but for a time only. So for 150 years, the US capitalist class has ruled by balancing between its two parties. Now one side of that balance scale has been completely destabilized, and that means that the 150-year method of rule of US capitalism in this country is now also destabilized. And I'll conclude with this. Foreign Affairs explains the dangers. Foreign Affairs is the journal of the Council of Foreign Relations, which is the premier US capitalist think tank. They write, US foreign policy could veer unpredictably from administration to administration. Same is true for domestic policy. The United States is taking on water itself. The country has entered what can only be characterized as an age of unreason, with large swaths of its population embracing wild conspiracy theories. And they conclude a second Trump administration would have done irretrievable damage. But even with Trump's defeat, the rest of the world cannot ignore the country's deep and disfiguring scars. They will not soon heal. In other words, Biden may represent a measure of stability, but even for a few years, but what Trump represented has not gone away. And the main question then is for us is how, through what channels, a mass working class party can start to develop. I believe it will develop mainly through a movement in the streets, and that it will not develop through a split in the Democratic Party, which might come at a later stage. So that is the main question: how such a party can develop, and how, through that, a revolutionary socialist wing within that party can start to get a hearing. Those are the questions of the hour, in my view. So, thank you.
Thanks very much, John, for that very interesting lead off, and thank you for being concise with the time. I'm sure we'll be able to come back to you for some more comments later. Right, I need to turn to David Hemser now. We've now got, I understand, a recording from Tia. David, how long is the recording?
About 12 minutes.
That's fine, yeah, okay. Right, so I'll let David introduce Tia anyway. Do you want to go ahead, David?
If I could, look, I think Tia is fairly well known to comrades who've been on different discussions. She's speaking directly from Louisville, from a center of discussion right now. This weekend, unfortunately, she's not been able to participate fully right now, along with China and others who wanted to participate, because they're all involved in discussions about the the anniversary of Breonna Taylor's killing and mobilization. So their action right now, the active discussions taking place on the way forward for the Kentucky Alliance and for the work that they've been doing. So unfortunately, you know, she's not present. I just want to, before I click on the video, I just want to mention that you mentioned someone called Hooker. He was a person who stood as a candidate, a left candidate in, you know, for Senate and lost, but not, she wants to discuss that. And then she also mentions ALEC, ALEC, which is the official name for the Tea Party, which managed to win a number of districts to the Republicans. And she'll explain about that. Here it goes. Just tell me if you can see.
Okay, so when we talk about the political game here in Kentucky, Louisville is the major city and the urban district, and then you have 120 rural counties. Alec and the Koch brothers have spent the last 8 years going to these rural counties and running their candidates. And so now we're at a super duper majority, which is 85% Republican in the Senate and 75% Republican in our House. And we do know that it was ALEC money because the legislation is ALEC-led legislation nationally, as well as hold on, I'm sorry. So yeah, all the legislation and the campaign money and everything, the same campaign styles. So Charles Booker has a program. He was a House representative from the west end of Louisville, and he was up there, and then he ended up running in the primary against Mitch McConnell. However, there was voter suppression going on at the time because of COVID, and I think with the absentee ballot. So he only lost by, I mean, not as much as we thought, and so in the primary against the other Democrat. So we have been looking at the districts where he's only lost at 100 to 200, and we are going to target those districts, canvass the rural county, hopefully use some of the active young folks that have been mobilizing here for 289 days at Injustice Square Park in Louisville, Kentucky since Breonna Taylor was murdered. And they are very active and they want something done. So we are trying to utilize and hopefully find some resources to take them across, do like a statewide and bring the hood to the holler and make sure that we connect the issues that are really need to be connected, like minimum wage. Poverty is violence. And so we see a lot of violence in our neighborhoods. But we know that like in the holler of Kentucky, the poor rural white folks, they still have violent issues when it comes to health care and environmental issues. And so we want to connect all of our issues that are the same when we live in poverty and try to grow from there, because we need small wins and we need to make sure that, and I tell people, going from a super duper majority to at least a balanced chamber, state, representative and Senate, it's going to take time. It took time. It took at least 8 to 9 to 10 years to get to the super duper majority. And so we need at least half of that time. So it's a long game. It's a marathon. It's just beginning. We're mobilizing young folks that want to come out here and really take protest to politics. And so that's how, but it's the power in the people, because the people that have the power now have that money, and they have lots of money. And that's how they've been winning, because we have been kind of like not really focused on what's going on in the rural counties. We usually just focus on our urban issues, because we still have a lot of them here. But yeah, that's the goal, and that's where we're headed to.
That's a very fantastic idea and strategy, Tia. Tell me, how is the Kentucky Alliance as a whole being turned on this issue? I mean, are you working here as a team?
Yeah, it's a coalition. I mean, the Kentucky Alliance alone cannot do anything. It's going to be in conjunction with the ACLU, with the Kentuckians for the Commonwealth. I mean, there's already some organizations in Kentucky that are doing this work. And like I said, hood to holler. I'm in an Arena Academy, conference right now, getting more strategy on looking at the data and targeting audience and everything else. And so really, like, the younger generation can reach out to the younger voters to get more voters, registered. I think that is what, a lot of Stacey Abrams' successes was, getting new voters registered, so that's younger voters, and bringing in some younger, like I said earlier, branding Until Freedom. I believe like they're doing a good job at bringing a lot of attention, as in celebrities and forums that have a lot, they're speaking about a lot of political issues. Like right now we have to fight against, a lot of politics right now that are silencing the protesters. So that's kind of motivating them to get involved. So yeah, I think I answered. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, sure. No, that's great. And,
okay.
And what about the unions? Do you see anything there in the teachers' unions or other unions which are sort of involved?
No, I don't think any of the unions are being helpful with helping for social justice. I believe that for a long time we have silently just gave them our money, and we've been worried, and all we've been focused on is our own pensions and our own health care benefits. And it's starting to bite us in the butt now, because like they're absent, and they have become corporate. A lot of unions have become corporate and have just been out here bidding for the corporation. Just as long as the members have, pension and retirement and salary steps, then we usually don't care. But now it's a bit different. I mean, we already know that politics and money, unions, supporting the people, the power, the hardworking middle class. We all know that's what runs this society. And so we have to look out for more than just certain people's pensions. We got to look at the overall health care for everyone. Like health care should be free for everyone. The minimum wage should never be $7.25 in 2021. But again, that is, like as long as you have those union jobs, which are higher paid, then they just left everybody else in the dust. They're not out here advocating for everyone else to get minimum wage, which they should be. They're not out here in the streets demanding justice for Breonna Taylor, which they should be. So the community sees it. The people that are in pain, we know it. So they just got to do better.
Great. Now, how things going with youth? You mentioned all the youth that are mobilized in the campaign. How do they see, turning out towards voter registration and work of that kind?
I mean, this is going to be the first for all of them. This is the first protest. This is the first occupation for them. This is the first time they have developed a community and really understood what that community meant. The mutual aid. Everything is new to them. And so it's all a learning curve. Everything is a learning curve, but they have done well. They jumped in and they want to learn. It's not that I'm forcing anything on them. They want to know, because these bills right now directly target the folks that stood out for 289 days directly. So they know that they're learning how politics works. And so they're being motivated. They're asking me, like, what can we do? So I have to get busy and get them across this state, talking to other folks that don't look like them, bridging gaps, trying to come up and seeing what they need so that we can advocate for those resources.
Okay, just one last point. You know, you've dealt with the question about the urban-rural divide. And now, you know, the mobilization, you know, around Breonna Taylor campaign has been fantastic. But how, you know, how did you see, you know, that campaign or that work being able to turn out to say poorer white communities in rural areas? Do you think we can get a common program going there?
Yeah, I think that is another thing that Stacey Abrams talked about is those false narratives that are out there that say, you know, like we will not get along, like they don't want to hear from us or we don't want to hear from them. It's all a false narrative. And I think once we get out there, we'll see, because I have been surprised. Charles Booker is a black man, a young black man, like 35, 36. And I really believe he won the primary, but they cheated him out of that. But I was so surprised just because he was a young black man from the hood of the only large urban district in the state. And he barely, I mean, he won a couple other districts in the rural counties and barely lost by a few. So that, I mean, that speaks volumes. That tells us that there really isn't that big of a divide.
Okay, that's great. Well, look, anything else you would want to say to, you know, to people internationally, to work, you know, we're the labor movement internationally?
I would just say when we come to labor unions, we have to start holding them accountable. And I know that most unions say they are for, they're anti-discrimination. They have maybe their little caucuses where they have racial, social racial issues, justice issues. But just to sit around and talk about it is just really comfortable for everybody. I would challenge most labor workers that, like, if you believe that your union is not doing what they need to be doing, then you have to step up and say something, because silence is violence. And they are complicit in a lot of the ways that we are, like, why we are where we're at. Because the middle class is really so close to poverty, you know, and the middle class is the line that is so close to poverty is just right at that union. Like, the union jobs are right above it. And there's so many other people that have so much money and we're not equitable, like, it's not equitable. And poverty is violence and we need resources. So, you know, demand that from the leaders of the labor unions, the folks that are the hardworking, middle-class folks out here. If you have unions, they should be the first ones out here advocating against the folks that are attacking you. So that's what we're doing here.
Okay, that's great. Look, I know that you're just about to go off to, you know, the commemorations that are taking place. You've been fully involved this weekend. Thanks for your time. It'd be great if anyone else could come in on the discussion at 1 o'clock. That would be fantastic. I'll get the link out to you guys on the cell phone. But look, thank you very much.
Okay, all right, thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
Sure.
Okay, bye.
Okay, thanks, David, presenting that. And can you know, thank Tia by proxy for making that video for us. We'll move on to the discussion now. If you want to come in, if you could just put your hand up in the electronic hand. I think Graham Durham's hand went up first. Can you try and keep your comments to 5 minutes as well initially, and then that gives lots of people a chance to come in.
Greetings, comrades from London. I'd just like to ask John a couple of questions rather than make a contribution. His prognosis of how a mass Labour Party in America might develop is interesting. He thinks that there won't be a split in the bourgeois parties, which is the way most social democratic and workers' parties have been created historically, obviously, particularly our Labour Party here in the UK. If that's the case, then there's going to be a possibility of a street power created party. How is that going to happen, and what signs does John or TSC of that happening? And just as a just a note. One last time I was in San Francisco about 7 or 8 years ago, and Oakland, I saw that the left in America was pretty badly split at that time, and the demonstrations I went on for Chelsea Manning, Brad Bradley at the time, were, you know, quite sectarian. And I just wondered if things have improved on that front, and how does this relate to the Democratic Socialists of America, which claim on their website, I just had a look, that in the East Bay area, they have 90,000 members. Sounds a lot, but is that true? What role are they playing? Are they part of a mass party? Do they want a mass party? Just questions for John, please. Thank you.
Okay. Can I suggest John takes the questions together, given we're running out of time? Would that be all right, John?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. Right, so it's Maddie next.
I was, just before this started, I watched an interesting program on CNN that I didn't even know existed, the series, where they look behind the news and they try to decide what is correct, true, and what isn't. I've forgotten the name of the program now, but it was about an hour or so before we started. One of the things they raised was Tucker Carlson and his role at Fox. Apparently he is being upgraded. He's getting more and more time and prime time, and he's being used as a kind of source of infotainment. He lies through his teeth, but he is cleverer than Trump in that he lies, he chooses his lies very carefully. And the panel that was discussing Tucker Carlson concluded that he might in fact be running for president for the Republican Party instead of Trump in 2024. And they regarded him, this was obviously a bunch of basically social democratic commentators who regarded him as far more dangerous, but also a very important mouthpiece for the Fox News and the whole of that. The name now escapes me, of the owner. That was one question I had. What, John, what do you and what do other comrades think of the potential of Tucker Carlson actually becoming a front runner for the Republicans? And then my second question is sort of shows my idealism. There is maybe a third of, according to the figures I've seen, of the Republicans, you've mentioned it also, John, who firmly believe that the election was stolen, etc. I don't need to go into all of that. Now, a lot of these people are working class. And these are the people being targeted to a very large, great extent, as I understand it, by the 1.9 trillion package. And I think you mentioned that as well, that families will be getting quite a large amount of money to assist them. Where the idealism comes in is whether there's any chance that rational behavior might develop. In other words, if people realize that their place in life is improving, their lives are improving because they're coming out of poverty, they're getting funding that they desperately need, might a considerable number of them actually become more rational and start acting in a more rational way. I'm referring primarily, of course, to working class people, and also what in the olden days used to be called lumpen proletariat. In other words, all the people who don't have jobs and are in a really bad way. Okay, those were my two questions.
Thanks for that, Maddie. Right, so David Hempson next. Okay, and PC, I'll put you on the list. Is that okay? Yeah.
Comrades, look, thanks for the lead off, John. What I think we're seeing are three big trends in America right now. First of all, there's something of a recovery in the economy, but it's not going great places. Secondly, we've got a reemergence from the pandemic. So for the first time, there's some concrete action nationally to be able to deal with the absolute crisis in public health. And then finally, we've got a political reawakening, after a period of political paralysis. Just to deal firstly about the economy, 9.5 million jobs have been lost, and particularly women. In the past recession, it was men who lost those jobs, good paying jobs, but now women have had a catastrophic effect, and it's going to be extremely difficult for women to be able to regain many of the positions that they've had before. Of capitalism, at least the plan is that they'll be able to get to pre-COVID states of growth in the next year. But we should remember that that pre-COVID state was tepid growth compared to what was there previously before the recession. But now we need to deal with the question of political paralysis. It's an astonishing fact. John touched on some of the points. But if you can imagine, during the so-called insurrection, I hate to use the word insurrection, it was more of a riot because, I hold the word insurrection with some respect. The riot which happened at the Capitol on the 6th of January was an astonishing fact. Look at the paralysis. If anybody knows DC, the FBI headquarters is only about 4 blocks away from the Capitol. And there, those people were sitting and watching on TV their sacred democracy center being trashed, and they just sit there completely paralyzed, do nothing. The heroes of the CIA in Langley, just across the river, are also totally immobilized. They're doing absolutely nothing. The National Guard wasn't there for 6 hours, apparently, after they had been called in. Now, obviously, there was a conspiracy there, or at least there was, deliberate attempt at not involving the National Guards and so forth, but the whole of bourgeois apparatus of control just disappeared, for a period, and nothing replaced it. I mean, it was a most extraordinary situation. And what is more extraordinary is that the political consequences have been muffled. Republicans are opposed to having a proper investigation and so forth. So there will be a long-term recovery here. There's going to be a lot of fighting about these issues for some time to come. Gloves, many of those who are accused and are appearing in court, been able to go on holiday to Mexico and so forth when they've been trashing the Capitol and involved in violence and real violence against police and others. But now, what is the effect, on the community? As we've seen, I think, from what Tia was saying, the Black community is mobilizing. I mean, I was quite astonished to hear the range of issues which now Kentucky Alliance was mainly a protest organization. There are 4 or 5 of those people in the leadership regard themselves as part of the ideas which we support. They're now mobilizing the youth. Remember, there have been hundreds and actually thousands of youth involved in the Breonna Taylor campaign, and now they're turning them out to fight against voter suppression, to be able to win Kentucky back to the Democrats. I'll come back to the question of the Workers' Party and as we go, but just consider this. The Republicans are in a bit of a mess. I think we all need to look at that. Despite the fact that Trumpism hasn't quite deflated at the speed at which I'd imagined, because I thought that when election had actually taken place, there would be a sense that people would not get positions in government, so that there wouldn't be the same rationale for a bourgeois party, because people expect to get ahead through being in a party, and now they can't get ahead. But Trump has obviously created enough of a sense in the section of the Republican Party, which is the majority, that they can still get places if they support him to the end. But it's not quite so simple. A third of the Republicans in a survey actually want an alternative to Trump, and they don't want to vote for him again. The second point is that in the communities on a national survey, they found that there's been in the number of independents. 40%, remember, America is not really a very tightly, it has become more partisan over time, but parties don't have the same sort of organizational strength as in Europe and elsewhere. 40% of people now identify themselves as independents, as only 25% of people nationally identify themselves as Republicans. So
David, you've got 5 minutes now, so if you just start bringing it to close, thanks.
End here.
Okay, thank you.
In other words, we are seeing on the one side, reaction still organizing. On the other side, we see Black communities, starting to organize and turning towards the union and getting the unions organized in Kentucky. We are still seeing a situation where only 10% of the American working class is organized in unions. That obviously has to change. Just one last point in relation to the to a working class party. I don't think there's a possibility of any mass-based working class party arising without Black participation, full Black participation, and full participation from the unions. If there was another way around this that would arise spontaneously from the streets, I'd be very interested. At the moment, I don't see it. Thank you.
That's great, David. Thanks very much. Right, Finn. Don't forget to unmute.
Comrades, I found the contributions by Tia and by John very interesting and very informative. I just want to focus on one question, which John expressed it as the need for a mass independent working class party. So I'd like the American comrades in particular, because of their experience on the ground, to explore with us how that might. Now, John has made valid and serious criticism of the union leadership, but it might be interesting for John to know that in Ireland, where I live and are active in the movement, it's just as bad. The leadership of our union movement some years ago agreed and signed off on a deal that represents a 20% reduction in the pay for all workers in the country. They also agreed to increase the working week with no increase in pay. So we're used to all this kind of thing here as well. So America isn't unique in that regard. But the question I want to raise is about the activity at a local level. Now, Tia alluded to some of this. Activity at a local level with trade union actions by local branches and local industries linked their movements into the local community. And that happened with the teacher strike, 25,000 teachers in Chicago linked in with the local parents group and community group to win the victories they won there. And their leader, Karen Lewis, became the most popular person in Chicago, in the city, arising from the strike. Now, Carol will know about her involvement with the community in East London, linking the schools and the communities together in common struggles. Now, there was I was reading about a struggle in Smithfield Foods in Bladen County in North Carolina, where the company did everything they could, including mass sackings, to divide the workers, to divide them 3 ways between white workers, Black workers, and Latino workers. They sacked 2,000 Latino workers as part of the campaign to stop the union. But the union won. And they won a $15 an hour minimum wage. And what they did to achieve that was they linked in with the local communities in boycotts of stores. They also involved the local religious leaders. They involved the National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People insofar as it has any influence in that area. But the point I'm making is that involving the local community enabled them to win. So when the new mass party comes about, it won't be just a trade union-based party. Now, the early founders of the International working men's association in America at the turn of the last century, under people like Frederick Sorge and people like that, they believed that the new mass party would come from trade union structures. Now it's different. It will have to come from a combination of community activities, local groups, and I think sections of Black Lives Matter, which would be a crucial part of that. David is right that there won't be a mass party in any meaningful sense without the full involvement of organised people of colour becoming organised, and also Latino workers and Asian workers and others. So I'd like the comrades to explore that a bit more. There have been some local significant actions like the Amazon strike in Alabama, also the alphabet strike as well, where local branches become involved. And of course, there's in Seattle, in the state of Washington, where the workers won, again, by involving local political forces, a $15 an hour minimum wage. So I'd just like comrades to explore that a bit more. And in conclusion, I just want to read a quotation which refers to the Democrat and the Republican Party. So the quotation goes as follows, describing the Democrats and Republicans: two great gangs of political speculators who alternatively take possession of the state power and exploit it by the most corrupt means and for the most corrupt ends. Each of the two major parties, which alternatively succeed each other, controlled by people who make a business of politics, who speculate on seats in the legislative assemblies of the Union, as well as of the separate states. Victory is rewarded with positions. The Americans have been trying for 30 years to shake off this yoke, which has become intolerable. A very good way to express what's happening between the Democrats and Republicans, and I'm sure we'll all agree with that. That statement was made in 1891 by Frederick Engels. So John is in complete agreement with Frederick Engels on that question, and I think it's something we need to keep an eye on, and not to be deluded into thinking that in some fundamental way these parties are different. Now, John always presents the thing in just this form, that they swap around depending on the needs of the time as to who's going to run the state at particular times. But getting back to my introductory point, I'd like the American comrades in particular in this discussion to explore in a bit more detail how this mass party might come about. And there was a conference called in 1927, which involved all various local community groups, farmer groups, left-wing groups, including Eugene Debs of the Socialist Party, around the time of the Farmer Labour Party movement. But nonetheless, there was a conference called in Chicago of all the various community and left forces with the aim of achieving just that, building a new alternative party to the Democrats and Republicans. Now, they didn't succeed, but maybe there's something there to explore for the future, such a conference. Now, John has called for such a conference in the past, I know, but maybe we could explore this question a bit more as to how a new working class mass party might come about.
Thanks, Finn. That's great. I'm just going to bring in next ABPC, who I think isn't called ABPC. Perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from, and then after that I'll call Linda in. Okay?
Okay. I'm not actually Ann, and this isn't my PC I'm using.
No, I thought not.
Yeah, I'm Eric Josephson from the Bronx. I am a retired track worker for the New York City Transit Authority, New York City Subway. Been retired for a while, try to stay active. And I am a supporter of the League for the Revolutionary Party. I am also officially a member of the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, as are members of many left-wing groups, including most recently a mass entry openly by members of Socialist Alternative in the United States. The Democratic Socialists of America do have an official plank that says no member of any disciplined democratic centralist organization can be a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, but they haven't enforced that at all recently. At this point, I think it will be very difficult for them. They claim, last I heard, they claimed 100,000 members, more than 100,000 members nationwide. That's ridiculous. No way in hell. I believe tens of thousands. I couldn't say how many tens of thousands, but I'm pretty sure that the whatever 50,000 extra they're claiming is paper membership. I got that impression. They are the most active branches of Democratic Socialists of America are those branches that spend all their time collecting signatures to put people on the ballot as Democrats. When they are published, when the hardcore Democratic Socialists of America are publicizing their electoral work, they always say, we're going to have socialists elected to now it's the City Council of New York. That's a current struggle. Or they say, we got enough signatures. We have somebody that will be running, a socialist, for the City Council of New York or the State Assembly of New York, whatever it might be. But they very rarely say that, in fact, it's the Democratic Party line on the ballot that, as far as I know, all their candidates are running on. So they should make that clear. They're not trying to pull a fast one, I think. It's all quite sincere. They also have any number of demonstrations, and they actually had sort of a split recently. The Nevada State Committee got all of its slate in the internal elections of the Democratic Party in the state of Nevada, got all of their candidates selected to run for office. And the mainstream Democrats in Nevada, who are also kind of left-wing, but the ones that don't like the DSA, congratulated them and then took everything in the office and absconded and have split from the DSA. So as for the point that one of the comrades made about it seems unlikely that the DSA would split, the Democratic Party would split, I don't know. As far as I know, everybody failed to predict the premature victory of a form of Bonapartism in not this past election, but the election before that in the United States, victory of Donald Trump. So there's going to be a lot of surprises. I would say that the most important thing coming up soon is, in fact, the union election, whether to have a union or not, in Bessemer, Alabama. The statistics I've seen are that 85% of the workforce is Black. The working class in that part of Alabama and most of the state of Alabama is Black. So anybody that talks about, we should all be very careful about talking to the appeal to the working class by Trump and company, because a lot of that is written out, a misunderstanding by bourgeois journalists and academics. That is to say, to such journalists and academics, if you work with your hands, you're working class. In fact, a whole lot of people, by the various polls and samplings that have been done, it's very likely that not a majority, but a plurality of hardcore Trump supporters are white males without a college education. This is something that the pollsters always cite. Without a college education, who do not work for somebody else. They're not employees. They could have like a small plumbing business or an electrician business. So in many cases, they actually have somebody working for them. And they are bosses. They are not at all working class, but they have a foot in the working class. So that's something it's important for us to understand. And last point, it has generally been my position and my thought that it's that it's unnecessarily, I'm not sure what the word is, but it's in some way wrong to insist that the party of the working class, mass party of the working class in the United States, would sort of start out reformist, and then there would be a wing that would fight for revolutionary socialism. That's entirely possible, but I don't like to see, considering all the surprises we've had, it's hard to say, and I would side with those comrades, I would agree with those comrades who say that a real party of the working class in the United States must be a party of Black people in the United States, Black people and immigrants. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
That's great. That's can you mute, please, if you're not speaking? Somebody's not muted. That's a really insightful thing. I'm sure we'd like to listen to you longer. Actually, I thought that was very interesting. But we've got quite a few hands up yet, so I'm going to bring Linda in next, and I'm hoping that Ed and Matthew, I know you've been waiting, if I could bring Cheryl in after Linda, because I think we need to hear from the American comrades. I hope that's okay with you. So Linda, would you like to go next? You need to unmute, we can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
You know, I'm from Minneapolis. I'm a member of DSA too. I'm also affiliated with one of the anti-fascist groups in town, which is true of quite a few other DSA members. My observation of the, I mean, I've been really paying attention to like the demographics of our situation and also the political alignments. I would say that between 20 to 25% of the people in this country are either fascist or fascist leaning. I mean, I get that number from looking at all the people, well, the Trump supporters, but then, you know, looking at the shrinking Republican Party, you have 75% of them. It comes to about, you know, or if you look at the electorate, which was like almost 160 million people, and you know the percentage of that. Plus, I mean, I don't want to get into all the weeds about the numbers, but the people that would fall into this category dropped after January 6th. I mean, they talk about how there are mass defections from the Republican Party. That's actually not true, but it would also be hard to measure exactly how many people left the Republican Party. But there's no doubt that this number that I've been trying to watch and calculate has dropped from like 30% to maybe 25 or 20 or even 20. If you look at the rest of the Republican Party, the logical progression for them would be to leave the Republican Party. I think Trump has decided pretty much not to start his own party, but just to take over the Republican Party, which means there won't be any room at all for the centrists. Logically, they should join the Democratic Party. I think that will eventually happen. You know, their main differences, which came out in the COVID bill, is they don't want any redistribution of income, and they also don't want women to have very many rights. You know, they're not really in the camp of the evangelicals and the Catholic Church, but they, you know, they'd still rather women, you know, be subordinate. These are not deal killers when it comes to the Democratic Party. I mean, I've been watching the Democratic Party for a long time, and these 2 points of contention could be easily papered over. So you'd have like a small regional fascist party, which would still be a real threat, and then maybe like 40 to 50% centrists all in one party for the first time. And then there'd be an unknown number of leftists. I would say that most of the left that's in the Democratic Party would probably leave at some point. So you'd be faced with a situation where the centrists have to decide, do they take on a slightly larger group of leftists, or do they go out, or do they ally with the fascist party to crush the leftists? I mean, if you know anything at all about history, and I know a depressing amount about history, to me it seems like a no-brainer that they would move to the right. now I admit here that I'm trying to look really far ahead, and it's extremely hard to do that when you have a volatile situation with so many moving parts and different actors. But the overall situation is you have to look at the American electoral system and the way that it can suppress the left, and also just the majority, the way it fosters minority rule. And then you have to look at the mobilization of the masses. And one of the things that people are mobilizing around is the franchise. I would never have guessed that this would happen in all the years I've been active, but the right to vote is quickly becoming a revolutionary demand. And what they're voting for, and I think they have their eyes open on this too, because what they're fighting for is the right to vote for a centrist over a fascist, which is not an appealing choice. But if you take the long view, fighting for the franchise is supplemented with other revolutionary demands. And it could really serve to shrink the fascist party even more than it is now. In fact, I think the Republican Party will pretty much go out of business and become a Trump party anyway. I can't think, when you look at mass mobilization, it's wrong to say that the left is paralyzed, I think, or that we don't have an organization. We don't have an electoral organization, despite what DSA is trying to do. We don't have a place at the table in the political system, and we don't have in the unions. While they're showing some glimmers of hope here and there, we don't really have the unions as an organization, mass organization either. What we're talking about mainly is people take street power, a street party. And I'm really skeptical of a street party because there's just too much room for opportunism and provocateurs. And like here in Minneapolis, you had a sudden, after the uprising started around George Floyd, you had a sudden invasion of nonprofits that swept in and tried to undo most of the work around mutual aid and other stuff, and tried to tamp down the police abolitionist movement to the point where we're not even talking about defunding them anymore. They're getting more money, even while we're paying out these huge funds for George Floyd's death and other things. But it's there, and it could. And there are lots of organizations, mostly online, but they have a base in the real world. And these organizations were not there 10 years ago, as far as I know, or even 5 years. They have really taken off, and they have a real potential to become eventually a mass revolutionary movement. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
We had to answer the phone. Cheryl, are you ready to go now?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
So, actually, Linda raised one of the points that I was going to speak to. So thank you very much for that, Linda. That never in my lifetime did I think that fighting for the right to vote would be in many ways a revolutionary demand, but it is getting to that point in this country, that it's that important. And that I'm going to sort of address issues and questions that several people raised, whether it was Graham, Maddie, and other people. In this moment, there are two bills working their way through the Congress and the Senate, the HR 1 and the John Lewis bill for voting rights. And the question hasn't been answered yet whether or not the Democrats are actually going to do something about eliminating the filibuster in the Senate to just get those bills passed. It's very unclear whether or not they're going to come out swinging for voting rights, even though there's a lot of rhetoric around that. And I think that the main reason that they're sort of hesitating or shifting, even though this debate is going on behind the scenes, is because they know that if they do that, then suddenly this balance, this gentleman's agreement that they've had for 150 years is going to come to an end because of what John was saying about the Republican Party, making it really clear that they're willing to be a minority party that rules by completely undemocratic means instead of following the rules of the past. So it's yet to be seen how that's going to play out. And it's very possible that there will be a movement in the streets, again, that I think would be led by Black activists. I mean, we know about Georgia, well, and Kentucky have been kind of the heartbeat of that fight around the fight against voter suppression. So that's something that's going to play out. So Graham asked about, again, how will a working class party emerge in the street? And whether or not the left is as sectarian now as it was 7 or 8 years ago. Well, I mean, it's been a year of the pandemic, but my view is that the left is just as sectarian as it was in those times, and if not worse. And in a previous WIN meeting, Felicity made the very good comment that the left is not the working class in this country. And I personally don't have a lot of, I don't put a lot of my eggs in the basket of the left to solve these problems. I mean, Graham said he'd heard that there's DSA in the Bay Area has 90,000 members. I think that is more likely a nationwide figure. The most recent number of members that I heard about DSA is 10,000 in the East Bay. And again, some of us here were members of DSA for a while, and who knows, I may rejoin in this moment. I'm not enthusiastic about that. But the problem with and so I didn't know that Socialist Action apparently is doing a mass intervention into DSA. And if they are, that's very interesting. But I'd like to know more from the comrade in Brooklyn exactly what their plan is, because if their plan is to simply go into DSA and to join little committees and be involved with the existing program of DSA, which again, I'm assuming all the comrades here know what it is, to support sort of leftist Democratic Party candidates, to not have any discussion about breaking free from the Democratic Party, no discussion of a working class party, not even talking about it. So unless they do that, what is the point? To just dissolve into DSA. In terms of uniting the left, wouldn't it be something if organizations like Socialist Action and the socialist left as a whole agreed that that's what we need? And if we're going to go into DSA together, let's work on that. Now, how do you talk about a working class party? So for instance, I was surprised that unless I missed something and the sound quality was very bad in the interview with Tia, David did not mention this, and I don't understand. I'd like him to answer that question. I don't think, maybe that's been discussed before, I do not know. But it's not my understanding that the Kentucky Alliance, the program of the Kentucky Alliance is talking about that. Now, how do you, in the era of Biden, and again, Biden is promising the stability that people have longed for a year in this country. And I agree with John, that I think that he is going to be successful in winning over some of the Trump supporters, even some of the QAnon supporters, because if you give people something concrete in their lives, that's good. Wow, you've changed my life. And again, we know that the Biden, the rescue plan, the intention for infrastructure improvements, employment, all this, it's holding open a promise for actually changing people's lives. So again, in that environment, how do you talk about, well, no, we've got to abandon the Bidens. They're no good. You can't say that. There's a way to talk about these things that I think would address, well, first off, you have to start by telling the truth, and the truth about the history of the Democratic Party, but which gets to Maddie's question about the lumpen proletariat and about rational behavior and what was it? I want to give an example, and I know I'm going to run out of time, Ken. Maybe I can come in again a second time because I have more to say. But a friend of mine who is still works at the water utility where I'm retired from, and it's truly the workers there, the labor aristocracy. They still have very good union contracts. However, there's always been a sector of the blue collar workers there. I was president of the blue collar union that have been attracted to. I'll call them neo-fascist ideas, the Ayn Rands of the world. There's always been a sector there. And so I've been in touch with this friend, this comrade, who's also a member of DSA, and he told me that he was given a copy of Atlas Atlas Shrugged, whatever, the Ayn Rand book about individualism. And he wrote a piece about this guy's thinking. He read the book and he responded and he wrote, let's see, John wrote a text. In any case, so, but here's the gist of it. Why are workers such as this guy attracted to the ideas of Ayn Rand? It's because they haven't seen, well, there's a lot of reasons, but one of the main reasons, they haven't seen any solutions to their problems offered by the main political parties. They don't see that. I mean, you know, we have to just be honest about the history of the Democrats. So where do they turn towards? Individualism. I'm going to solve my own problems. And that's partly what Ayn Rand is all about. Anyhow, I could say more about that. I'm just looking at my notes here, see if there's anything else I want to say. I might come back in.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll come back
so
in.
hopefully there might be chance. We've got 2 hands up at the moment. There might be a chance for people to come back in quickly,
Okay.
and also to respond to any questions that have been asked, because I know some individuals have been mentioned. So Matthew, can you come in now?
Yeah, hi comrades. Sorry, I'm hoping my camera's going to work. So yeah, very good contributions. It was useful, interesting. I think that obviously, you know, as the comrades have said, I mean, we're facing a situation, you know, of deep crisis. I mean, you're almost sort of, you know, a very, very prolonged crisis as well. I mean, I think, you know, even if we look at sort of the whole thing that goes back to 2008, 2007-8, in which the, you know, essentially the chief influence of the ruling class, that is finance capital, actually exploded in its hands. It hasn't fixed any of that. You know, the fact that you know, essentially, it's also, the other thing, of course, is it's used finance capital in order to strip out, you know, large amounts of production and so on and so forth, to atomize the working class and reduce its precarity in large part, and impose control in that way. But in a position in which it also, the system itself is breaking down. It's actually disintegration. And I think obviously this is now, you know, having an effect, I mean, really profound effect on politics and the political system, as comrades have said. You know, this is, you know, the whole system that's been in existence is now in question and ceasing to function, and bits of it, as I say, you know, as I said, going off towards fascism, bits of it being blown out in various directions. And the Democrats, obviously, you know, really under conditions in which you would expect the thing to split. But the point being, I think, is that will continue, and while you also get this position in which the US itself, in its declining phase in the world, is now lashing out and attempting to use sort of its huge military position in order to lash out in different parts of the world, whether that's the Middle East or Afghanistan or against China or whatever else, and all that, you know, all of that starts to play a role as well. You know, both in the world itself and of course in the US, there's still a hegemonic power, which of course affects everybody, all the rest of us. You know. And at the same time, of course, as we've seen with Trump, of course, is that because production is international, that you know, Trump's efforts against China start to reverberate against the whole basis of production and consumption in the US itself. I mean, it gets down to sort of craziness. But I think the other thing that's been interesting, and I think in many countries, and particularly I think in the US, gone to that extreme, it has been the role of the union bureaucracy, which of course is precisely because the ruling class has been able to prevent the left from forming anything of any weight and size, and that's been deliberate. I mean, it's not been messing about. You know, if you look over the decades, I mean, it's been absolutely deliberate and clear that that's what they've attempted, that's what they've done, and it's not, you know, it's not without any direction or whatever else. They actually want that, and because of the lack of that we, you know, therefore you can have positions where they can rely on things like the union bureaucracy, you know, which has held. I mean, the problem is that I mean, despite the fact that obviously the unions now don't organise that many workers in the US, I mean, it's still a key point. But all the strike movements in the US, and there have been a number, and I think they've been extremely encouraging to see it. You know, things like the teacher revolt and all the rest of it. Nothing has yet broken through the control of the bureaucracy. You know, they've always been able to reassert and to hold the line and prevent things from getting out of their control. Which, I mean, it exists here, it exists in the rest of Europe as well, in the UK and the rest of Europe. It's the same. I mean, it's that same layer. And the problem is, I mean, at the point, will the working class be able to break through the control of that layer, which is clearly now fairly deeply integrated into the political and state mechanisms of the ruling class? And two, you know, can it also at the same time the left actually generate something that is actually worth presenting in front of the working class? I mean, beyond the sort of sex and ridiculousness that generally has been in existence, which I mean occupied some very good people, but have not actually been able to present anything of a mass appeal to the working class. And I think that's really the key question at this point. Thanks.
That's great, Matthew. Thanks very much. I think we need another meeting on this. We can see it going on all night. Right, I have two hands up, and then I think we've got to return to John Reimann then, so we can, because he's been asked a lot of questions, so he can actually respond adequately as best as he can in the time. So I just ask the remaining two comrades to keep the comments as concise as possible. So could we start with you, Ed?
Thank you, Pam. Well, I found it very, very interesting listening to the reports of comrades, particularly the American comrades, of what's happening on the ground. And there's a number of things I'll definitely sort of take away from this meeting. I completely agree that it's, I think this was Linda's point, that this is a very volatile situation. And we have to be, therefore, very careful about how precisely we predict what's happening. I think we know the general line of development that, you know, US capitalism, its position as a world economic player is declining, and therefore it's becoming more and more difficult for the United States ruling class to raise the living standards of the mass of the population in ways which have justified their system historically over the last 100 years or so. You know, the people saw America as a society where you could become wealthy. And I think Eric made the point that there are going to be a lot of surprises. Because the situation is so volatile, I think we've got to be extraordinarily careful about having very preconceived idea. We know that the working class will move into action if their living standards are not raised by the ruling class. So it's a fundamental of Marxism. How and where and precisely when they move into action, it's more difficult to be precise about. And I also agree, I think this is something that Cheryl brought out, that the left that we have today is not the movement that will come in the future. I mean, the movement, you know, the movement that will come in the future can be seen not in the small discussions of left. It can be seen in the huge demonstrations. For example, the demonstrations of women that took place when Trump was first inaugurated. You know, hundreds and thousands of women in every town in the United States marching for the first time, you know, a completely new movement. And actually, where I was at that time in New Orleans, although it's a black city, not a very big involvement of the black population. It was women's movement, and it was predominantly white women involved in that. And then Black Lives Matter, you know, progression. Black Lives Matter came after that. And even the steps that Black Lives Matter have taken demonstrate political development. Of course, it doesn't make it a revolutionary movement, not yet, But you start with demands for reform of the police, and you move on to demands for defunding the police. That in itself is political progress. You start with a movement, an amorphous movement on the streets, and you get to a point where Black Lives Matter is organizing with some of the unions. That whatever the limitations of the unions, that is a recognition that it needs to be part of the official working class movement. So that we do see progression. That there are reasons to expect that this political progression will continue. I think we need to be very careful about the idea that when a new movement develops, that there will be a revolutionary socialist wing of that movement. I think given the way a new movement can develop, and it could easily be a movement where revolutionary politics is developing across the whole movement without particularly an identifiable revolutionary wing pushing those conclusions, because of the extreme crisis and the pressures that are on both the American working class and on the ruling class in America. So I think this has been a great discussion, and lots to learn from it. And the thing I'm really trying to is to be very careful about not being over predictive. I wouldn't want to get involved in an argument about whether the Democrat Party will split or whether there'll be a movement on the streets that produces this party. It could be both. It could be a combination of both, and other surprises as well. We have to have open minds. What we do know for sure is the American working class will move, and they will move towards revolutionary politics.
Thanks very much, Ed. That's great. So finally, a man.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just be very, very brief on this. I was very interested to hear all the comments that were given. There were just two questions which I had, which I think is probably, from what I understood, was being made across the board. And that is, assuming that the socialist revolution is not going to happen through the Democratic Party, and there is going to be a working class party that would require to do that at some stage. Then in that case, the question is, to what extent is the left in the US separating from the idea of thinking that the Democrats, for some reason, are going to lead workers to a better life? And wouldn't that be a good marker to see when would the working class move away from this two-party system? And the extent that it moves it would be the extent that we will see revolutionary progress in the US at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Aman. Thank you again for being concise with the time. So that's it now. We've no time for any more contributions. So I'll return the floor to John Reimann. Perhaps like to sum up for 10 or 15 minutes. So we may run over slightly. I hope that's all right with everybody. We did start late, so nobody's objecting. So, okay, John, I'll sort of about 15 minutes, yeah?
Okay.
Just enough, yeah? Okay.
First of all, on the question of that quote from Engels on the difference between the Republicans and the Democrats, I'm posting in the chat there an article that I wrote a few weeks ago on exactly that issue, and I actually scandalized quite a few of the people out here that know me, in that I voted for Biden in this last election, because I think we have to recognize that that difference between the two parties has changed, in that the Republicans have now developed a significant outright fascist wing, and the role they are playing is different from what it used to be. Now, on the issue of working class support for Trump, I think that we must not, of course, the working class remains the only force for change, the only revolutionary or potentially revolutionary force in the United States or anywhere else. But saying that, we must not hide from ourselves the serious problems that exist within the working class. It's estimated, according to one poll, that 37% of union members, not people by income, education level, or anything else, 37% of union members voted for Trump in 2016. And both then and in 2020, 40% of voters from union households voted for Trump. So, and I've talked to quite a few people in the building trades and other blue collar unions, and they tell me, look, amongst the white members, the support for Trump is very large, and in fact is probably the majority in some cases. And I'm not talking about reactionary states either. So we don't do ourselves any favors if we try to pretend that there is not what has nearly become a problem of crisis proportions within our class. So the question was raised about how will the Biden package affect those working class Trump supporters, and will the economic improvements that that his relief plan bringing into place, will that change their thinking? And I think it very well may for a period. But again, we have to remember the potential landmines, the potential shocks that can change things. I mentioned, for instance, the question of inflation, and that is already becoming a serious threat. Then you have the question of the economic, environmental, and political refugees that are now increasingly coming across the border. And those issues, as well as others, can tend to overwhelm the economic issues. Now, Linda mentioned that issue of a wing of centrist Republicans joining or supporting the Democrats. And that's already started to happen. In fact, that was how Biden won the election, with a whole layer of mainly middle-class suburban voters who were traditionally voted Republican and have started to and now shifting to the Democratic Party. And also the capitalist class has really almost overwhelmingly is now supporting the Democratic Party. And that will put pressure on the Republicans to go even further in the direction of voter suppression. And the question that is very much an open question is whether they can succeed. And as I said, they nearly took the White House and retook both the Senate and the House of Representatives just in last November. So I think it is an open question whether the Republicans can succeed in that. And it's a sign, incidentally, of the extreme weakening that the capitalist class has on their hold over what they call public opinion. Now, the big question is the question of how a working class party can develop. And incidentally, it's the historical absence of a working class party in the United States that has led to, that is directly involved both as an effect and also as a cause of the low level of what you could call social class consciousness. That is to say, workers who were aware of the clash of interests between themselves as workers and the boss on the job, but they don't translate that into a similar awareness in society as a whole, and seeing themselves and their class, our class, as having distinct interests that are separate and apart from and in conflict with the bosses in society as a whole. Now, and I think that the most likely way that such a party will develop. And we have to remember that, especially here in the United States, the working class party is not just simply something to mobilize people to get out and vote. It has to be an organizing center for the working class to move into action in the streets and the workplaces and so on. And I believe most likely it will be out of that, out of a mass movement arising. And incidentally, I completely agree that it will be the Black working class and Black working class youth that will be at the very center, at the very forefront of such a movement as has already started. It will be through that, through a more persistent movement around that, that then I think most likely is that some sort of, especially if the movement has democratic structures within it, which we have not seen recently, that some sort of national coordination will start to develop, and a coordinating body to coordinate and learn the lessons from and to lead forward a movement like that. And what is that if it has a working class base, but the beginnings of a working class party? And I think it's very, very possible that it will only be at a later stage that such an organization will start to actually, that the question will be posed for it, whether or not it will run its own candidates or support the Democratic Party candidates. And that then at that point will be critical for it. And on this question of whether the Democrats will split, I mean, in the absence of such a movement, then any Democrat, if you're Ocasio-Cortez, for instance, the most left, quote, Democrat around, if you split from the Democratic Party at this point, before such a movement starts to develop, that will automatically mean you won't get reelected to office before such a movement starts to develop. And so therefore, I think I agree that you can't be certain about anything today, but I think it's highly, highly unlikely that such a split will develop before a movement develops. And the importance of that question is because if we see it the other way around, then we can tend to focus on calling for such left Democrats, as some comrades here have in the past, calling for such Democrats to split from the Democratic Party and build a working class party, which implies that they will lead the movement for a working class party rather than the working class itself. And I think that is a mistake. Now, on this question of whether such a party will be a revolutionary party or not, you know, the issue, a revolutionary party has a specific meaning. And it means not only mouthing the words for revolution and so on, but actually having a program and a strategy, which is to say a transitional method to leading from where we are at the present moment towards the working class seizing power. Now, there can be, it's entirely possible that a working class party, the more it's delayed, the more it may tend to express the desire of workers to have a revolution, but without that strategy, without clarity on it. And there's a name for a party like that. That's called centrism. And we must not confuse centrism with a revolutionary party. And so, and I think that there is a danger in thinking that, as Ed put it, that revolutionary politics can develop across the whole movement. The danger is then that we can tend to blur our clarity on what the program and the strategy necessary to overthrow capitalism is, and just make incorrect and unprincipled concessions to this sort of confusion. So now on the role of DSA, I mean, again, I scandalized a lot of people that know me over the years by having joined DSA about 4 years ago. Now, my experience is that it's not just a problem of the fact that DSA is, and the overwhelming majority of its members that I know of, are so closely linked with the Democratic Party. My problem with DSA is what I've seen both here in this area and also nationally in general is that there is very, very little interest in discussing perspectives and discussing theory in a real sense and discussing strategy and program. And so that is the main frustration for me. And I'm still a member of DSA, but as far as participating to any great extent, it's just, you know, I mean, if I had unlimited energy and unlimited patience, I would participate to some extent. But unfortunately, I'm human and not a computer, and that's somewhat limited. So I just can't. Now, Maddie also raised the question of Tucker Carlson and whether he could be preparing for a run for president. And she's not the only one who's raised it. I think it was Atlantic Magazine, which is a very serious bourgeois journal. They've raised that also. And the point that they've raised is that as a right-wing demagogue, Trump just happened to get lucky in that he ran against somebody who was personally extremely unpopular and also happened to be a woman, which the two things combined. But that as a right-wing demagogue, he is really incompetent, and that the more incompetent right-wing demagogues will come along. And they mentioned Tucker Carlson. There's also a whole series of others, Matt Gaetz, Josh Hawley, that Amy Taylor Greene, the QAnon supporters. There's going to be a whole list of them. And I think that they're all hoping that Trump has a heart attack or something so that they can get their chance to shine. As far as the voting rights bill that Cheryl mentioned, the problem with it is, number one, it's going to be very, very hard to get it through the Senate because there's a couple of senators that will probably defect. But even if they do, you also have the Republican-controlled Supreme Court, which has already gutted the previous Voting Rights Act. And I think there's a very good likelihood that it would gut that one, especially any new one, especially in the absence of mass action in the streets. And I want to make one point I think that I didn't have a chance to make before, and that is, you know, we tend to see voting as an individual action, or in fact, it does tend to be an individual action. But we have to take real note of what happened in Georgia, because they are a key to the Democrats' success, not just in November, but also in January when they elected as a shock 2 Democratic senators, and to add insult to injury, one of them was black and the other one was a Jew. The way they got them elected, the way those votes turned out was that it was voting tended to become a collective action through the black churches, where Sunday after Sunday they would take their parishioners to the polls to vote together. And that is so that there's a real danger, not just to the Republicans, but to the capitalist class as a whole, as the voter suppression really starts to bite. And it could be that despite the fact that every major left force, both the non-profiteers, the union leadership, and all the rest of them are either ignoring voter suppression or else completely allowing the Democratic Party leadership to control the response to it. Despite that, it could be that mass voter suppression could be the thing that really sparks a mass movement. And Georgia could be an example. And incidentally, it's important to note that whereas the Black population in the United States is about 13%, in Georgia it's 32%. So those are the main things that that I wanted to comment on. I'm sure I've missed a few points, but anyway, it's been a very interesting discussion, and I look forward to more, including discussions where some of our differences are explored more openly and directly.
Right, thanks, John. Absolutely brilliant. Yes, I completely agree. I think it's been a very good meeting and a very good opportunity to express views and to discuss things. And I'm sure that with the ongoing situation in the United States, the United States will return into this time and time again. So, another big thanks to John for doing his presentation and leading the discussion, and again to David Hempson and by proxy to Tia for providing her testimony on what's happening in her parts of the woods. So before we close, I'm just going to hand everybody back to Ed Bober, who's going to make an announcement about next week's meeting.